I never thought much about living alone until last winter. My apartment is on the top floor of an old converted Victorian house, the kind with ornate moldings and creaky wooden floors that have settled over a century of existence. Most nights, I actually enjoyed the silence after my roommate moved out. But that changed during one of the coldest weeks of February I have ever experienced. The first night, I woke up around 3 a.m. to what sounded like breathing. Slow, eerie, and definitely not mine. I sat up, heart pounding, and listened. The sound seemed to be coming from the heating vent near my bed. Just the old furnace, I told myself, finally falling back asleep as the sound faded. The next night it happened again, only louder. The breathing had a distinct rhythm to it. 3 seconds in, hold for 2, 4 seconds out. Too precise to be human. I got up and checked every room, finding nothing out of place. I even went downstairs to the vacant apartment below mine, but the door was still padlocked from the outside. There was no way to get in. I gave up for the night. By the third night, I started recording the sounds. Listening to the playback with my headphones I bought specifically for this, I noticed something that made my blood run cold. A faint whisper between breaths that sounded like my name. I called my landlord the next morning. He seemed annoyed, but agreed to check the heating system. When he arrived, he brought building plans and spent an hour in the basement. When he returned, his face was pale. "There's something you should know about this house," he said hesitantly. "Before the conversion, there was a small room between the floors. It's not on any modern blueprints because it was sealed off during renovations in the 1960s. "What kind of room?" I proceeded to ask. "They called it a breathing room. Victorian doctors used to recommend patients with consumption spend time in sealed chambers. The previous owner had tuberculosis. That night, I stayed at a hotel. When I returned 2 days later, the breathing had stopped, but something else started. A persistent scratching from inside the walls, as if something was trying to get out. Sometimes it sounds like fingernails. Other times, like someone trying to tap out a message. I still live here. The rent is too good to leave, but I never sleep without noise-canceling headphones. And I never, ever answer when I hear my name whispered through the vents at night." I never paid much attention to the attic in my new apartment. It was just a square hatch in the ceiling of my hallway with a pull-down cord. The landlord mentioned it was mainly for houseworkers to access and storage. For the first 3 months I lived there, I never had a reason to open it. That changed during a bad thunderstorm last October. The power had gone out around 9 p.m., and I was sitting in my living room scrolling through my phone to preserve battery when I heard it. A soft but distinct click from the hallway. I froze, listening intently. Another click followed, then silence. I grabbed my flashlight and made my way to the hallway. The beam lit up the pull-down cord of the attic hatch, swaying slightly. I told myself it was just the old building settling or the storm causing changes in air pressure. Nothing to worry about. I went back to the living room but couldn't shake the uneasy feeling. 20 minutes later, I heard it again. Click. This time followed by a soft, scraping sound, like something being dragged across wood. Heart racing, I returned to the hallway and shined my light up at the hatch. The cord wasn't just swaying now. It was moving in small jerks, as if someone above was gently tugging on it from the other side. I stood shocked, watching it move. That's when my phone rang, startling me so badly I nearly dropped the flashlight. It was my landlord. "Hey, sorry to call so late," he said, "but I wanted to check if everything's okay with the apartment during the storm." "Actually," I said, "I think there might be something in the attic. The hatch keeps making noises." There was a long pause before he spoke again. "That's not possible." "Why not?" "Because there is no attic in your unit. That hatch leads to a sealed space between floors. It hasn't been opened in years." I looked up at the cord, which had stopped moving. Then why is there a pull-down cord? There isn't one. That hatch is screwed shut. Has been since before you moved in. I shined my light up again. The cord was still there, hanging down about 6 inches from the hatch. "I'm looking at it right now," I insisted. "Get out of the apartment," my landlord said, his voice suddenly urgent. "Get out now. I'm calling the police." I backed away, keeping my eyes on the hatch. As I reached the end of the hallway, the cord gave one final jerk, and the hatch began to open inward. I didn't wait to see what was coming down. I ran out the front door and didn't stop until I reached my car. The police found no one in my apartment when they arrived, but they did find the attic hatch wide open, and according to them, there was no pull-down cord attached to it at all. I never spent another night in that apartment, and to this day, I don't look up at ceiling hatches. During my senior year of college, I rented a small house about a mile from campus. It was nothing special: 2 bedrooms, 1 bath, a tiny kitchen, and a living room with windows facing the street. The rent was cheap because it was in an older neighborhood where most of the residents were elderly. I lived alone and usually enjoyed the quiet. But during finals week in December, when everyone else was either at the library or holed up in dorms cramming for exams, the isolation of the house began to feel oppressive. One night around 11 p.m., after studying for hours, I decided to take a break and make some coffee. While waiting for the water to boil, I glanced out the kitchen window into the backyard. It was pitch black except for the motion sensor light by the back door, which wasn't triggered. That's when I noticed something odd, a dark shape standing just at the edge of where the light would reach if triggered. It looked like a person, but I couldn't make out any features. I squinted, trying to decide if it was just a shadow or my tired mind playing tricks. The kettle whistled, startling me. When I looked back, whatever I'd seen was gone. Shrugging it off, I made my coffee and returned to my books. About an hour later, the motion light in the backyard flashed on. I went to check and saw nothing, just empty yard and the tall wooden fence surrounding it. I figured it was probably a cat or raccoon passing through. I was about to turn away when the light shut off after its 30-second timer, and in that instant, in the sudden darkness, I saw a face pressed against the window. It was pale, almost gray, with sunken eyes that seemed to have no light. The mouth was slightly open but completely still. It didn't move, didn't blink, just stared directly at me. I stumbled backward, dropping my mug on the kitchen floor where it shattered. When I looked up again, the face was gone. Heart racing, I checked all the doors and windows to make sure they were locked, then called campus security. They said they'd send someone to drive by, but it might be a while. While waiting, I sat in the living room with all the lights on, trying to convince myself it had been my reflection or an optical illusion. That's when my phone rang. Unknown number. I answered hesitantly. Hello? Nothing but breathing on the other end. Soft, measured breaths. Who is this? I demanded. The breathing continued for another few seconds, then stopped. A voice, barely above a whisper, said, "Look outside." I hung up immediately and called 911. While talking to the dispatcher, I moved to the living room window and peeked through the blinds. Standing under the streetlight directly across from my house was a figure, too far away to see clearly, but it was definitely looking in my direction. As I watched, it raised one arm and pointed directly at my window. The police arrived 12 minutes later. They found no one in the yard or on the street, and no signs of anyone trying to break in. The officer suggested it might have been a prank, possibly by other students who knew I lived alone. I stayed with a friend that night, and the next day, after my final exam, I went back to the house to pack some things, planning to stay away until after the break. As I was gathering clothes from my bedroom, I noticed something on my desk, a Polaroid photograph that wasn't mine. With trembling hands, I picked it up. It was a picture of me, asleep in my bed, taken from the doorway of my bedroom. Written across the bottom in black marker were the words, "I've been inside." I left everything behind and never spent another night in that house. The police investigation found nothing. No fingerprints, no evidence of a break-in. The previous tenants had no issues, and nothing unusual happened to the people who moved in after me. Sometimes I wonder if I imagined the whole thing, a hallucination brought on by stress and sleep deprivation during finals. But I still have that Polaroid, locked away in a drawer I never open. And sometimes, when I'm home alone at night, I still check the windows, just to make sure there's no face pressed against the glass, watching me.